going on, everyone? I'm with Coach Stug from Lindenwood University. Pretty awesome to have him here. If you guys checked out our second episode with Clint Sig, this is the man who made it all happen for the young man. He's got an amazing story. Couple trips, just like everyone on this show. Nothing too linear. But without further ado, Coach Stug.
Thanks, Pat. Man, great being here, man. Thanks for having me on today. Been looking forward to this.
Yeah, I think we kind of jacked it up a little bit because I think our first pre-conversation was probably the best part about the content, and you can't do it twice.
Well, we'll give it a shot.
But, obviously Clint was the big, kind of the, what's the word I'm looking for, matchmaker in this. But before Lindenwood, before Sioux Falls, you were playing college football from, I think, 1991, 1992, and then had a little bit of a hiatus from football. Let's just touch into that because when people Google your name, something's going to come up.
Well, I did. I left. I loved playing college football. I wanted to always play college football, and I had that opportunity out in California to Azusa Pacific. But my passion, kind of growing up, kind of in the country. Loved country music, had a little music talent that I was, born with and really wanted to pursue the country music career, as far as basically as a songwriter, kind of ended up being into the country singer mode and actually kind of got to where we were touring around and got close to, getting close to some signings, record deals and all that fun stuff. But that journey, like I said, that would be a whole episode to itself of that whole journey. Long story short, God closes doors for a reason. I just took 1 year to pass some time from Nashville to go back to my hometown. Helped a buddy of mine that coached high school football, and I thought, well, I'll just do this to volunteer, have fun, just to pass some time, and then went back to Tennessee, and then came back, and Joe Glenn at Northern Colorado, kind of who I knew a little bit from the past, said, hey, man, you can come help us volunteer for a fall. So I went and did it again at Northern Colorado, and before I knew it, I was all the doors opened to coaching and being a GA, and fell in love with coaching and really fell in love with coaching kids, man. That was what brought me a lot of joy. So I felt like that was my calling.
Yeah. Now you spent a couple of years there, and then eventually just kind of growing, falling into it and everything like that. And what was it, only about 4 or 5 years until you took the next step to, run your own program after being the DC over there for a little bit?
Yeah, a very unorthodox career, Pat. It's like, not, probably didn't fall in place like a lot of people do because, we did the same thing in Northern Colorado that we're doing here at Lindenwood. We were transitioning from Division II to Division I, and unfortunately, it did not go well. It wasn't funded right. It wasn't supported. We were kind of. I always say we were kind of going into a nuclear war with bows and arrows. Man, we didn't have a chance, And so, yeah, we ended up. My head coach got fired. We were all kind of out with the bathwater. And usually, after you get fired off the staff, you got to go kind of just scratch and claw and go get in somewhere, just find a position job.
So you go from DC to maybe quality control,
right?
Because I've seen that happen to a lot.
Well, yeah, just unfortunately, you're when you're let go from a staff that gets fired, you're not considered the hottest coach out there. Right? So how that again, another episode that we could cover a whole half hour on is just how I got to my first head coaching job at MidAmerica, because you don't typically come from a fired staff to a head coaching job, but again, it's with God, all things are possible.
You touched on it, and that was kind of a little bit later in the show I want to get into, but obviously Lindenwood going from D2 to the Ohio Valley Conference. You guys are playing SEMO's pretty good the last couple of years. I think Eastern Illinois has always been a decent school. Mm-hmm. When you were going to Lindenwood from Sioux Falls, was that something that they talked to you about, hey, this is the goal, or is just hey, this is happening, you've done this before, good luck, bud?
No, and the Division I thing never even came up. I think it came up because I asked the AD at the time. I said, because a friend of mine, Jim Sabota, who was at Central Missouri, him and I had been friends for a long time. Because I had an offer from Missouri Western and Lindenwood, I had to make a choice. Yeah. And so when I was talking to Sabota through just kind of getting some bouncing some things off him, and because he's a good friend, he mentioned, he says, I've heard these rumors that Lindenwood might be going Division I someday, and I was like, well, that's interesting, because I was a little snake bit from the Northern Colorado move, because I'm like, man, sometimes these transitions don't go well, obviously. Yeah. So I just kind of point blank the AD at the time just said, hey, are we going? Are you guys looking at? He said that's not even in the talks right now. Which when I got there, I realized was not.
It was like 2017, right? 2017,
yeah, and it really wasn't. I even remember I asked the president about it, and at that time, the president we had no interest. So no, I had no clue until we got an email announcing that we were going
just
D1.
Hey, by the way.
By the way thing. Yeah, it was a little bit, talk about keeping stuff confidential. They kept it really quiet.
Now, obviously, like you said, snake bitten from the no-co days, how much of that did you have to, like, lean on those days? Like, kind of, I don't want to use the word trauma. I think it might be overused, but okay, let's kick back and let's, figure out, like, okay, this is what we did terrible the first time. I've been through this before. Let's push on and, like, we're going to get through this, guys. Because, obviously there was recruiting and, funding's a little bit more, but, great power comes great responsibility type thing. It's a whole different ball game because now you're, like, film is out there, but it's a little bit different that now you have 11 teams you've never played against before. So it's a completely new, like, feel and getting to know the coaches of the other teams and whatnot.
Yeah. Well, I always kind of have this little saying I've said, and I've been kind of writing down notes through my career of just little memoirs of and I went back and looked, and it was kind of came up with this little title called The Blessing of Adversity. It sounds weird because, when are we ever grateful for adversity? But when you get old enough and you start to look back and you realize adversity kind of gets you where you're at. You don't feel the joy in that adversity at the time until you look back and go, okay, I was being protected for something. I was being prepared for something. Yeah. I kind of, kind of lived my life around a Bible verse, in James chapter 1, it talks about that consider it joy when you face trials. Well, I didn't realize, we had the transition at Northern Colorado. When I ended up went to UNLV, our head coach gets fired there. Yeah. Next thing you know, I'm, just got there a year there. Next thing you know, we're back to looking for a job. Spent 3 weeks at Central Missouri with Jim Sabota when Sioux Falls called me and says, hey, again, when do you get offered head coaching jobs after you've been fired? It just doesn't happen.
It's a failing upward. You're just like, I don't know if I'm doing something right.
Yeah, I had a good friend of mine that I GA'd with a lot named Brian Applewhite when we were at Northern Colorado, and we were sitting around with a bunch of coaches one day at a convention, and he's like, Stug's the only guy I know that, can get head coaching jobs twice after he's been fired. Like, how does that even happen? Well, so again, go to Sioux Falls, and they're now – they're moving from NAIA to Division II. Yeah. So now I'm going into my second transition, and that transition went well. We were able to transition into D2 and ended up, becoming a conference champion and had really in that stretch had the highest winning percentage in the Northern Sun at the time. So that transition went well, yeah. But the school supported that, did those things well. So to answer your question, I've had a transition that didn't go well, had a transition that went well. So I felt a real peace about when they said, hey, we're going Division I here, because number one, to answer your question, I leaned on my experiences and was able to tell our administration, just kind of had to lay it out there honestly and say, hey, if you want this to go well, then these are the things we need to do, and these are the things we can't do. And I really appreciate Dr. Porter, Brad Walkler at the time, our AD, that helped us get through that transition, and then Jason Coomer, our new AD. I really appreciate the fact that they've kind of said, yeah, let's look at some of these things that maybe he went through, that and they've, you don't get everything you want, yeah, but you appreciate when people listen and say, okay, that makes sense, and I think it's helped with that, because we do feel supported. We do feel like, we've got an administration that wants us to be successful, and they're willing to say, okay, some of the blind spots out there that sometimes administrators don't know about.
Well, you also went 7-3 this year, and, like, I don't know, I'd have to deep dive into, like, the analytics of everything, but obviously you're the head coach of the team. You feel good about your team, but there's also something of, like, the realistic, like, in your mindset of, like, I'd be okay with a 5-5 year, like, because then you can at least build on that, So the transition goes extremely as extremely smooth as one can go. What do you say about like the testament of like having the players buy in, the coaching staff buy in and whatnot? Because that's what it comes down to when you're the head football coach, is being a leader of men more than X's and O's, because you're leaning on your coordinators, obviously, to do the X's and O's, and you're leading a program more than anything like that.
Well, it's a slogan and it's a cliche to say culture wins, but like the reality is culture wins.
Yeah.
I think, and you've got to be deliberate on how you create that culture. I think, that's a buzzword that every kid hears when they go on visits is, everybody says family, everybody says our culture.
Yeah.
And but you have to be really deliberate to do that. I think I can pinpoint back to last year. Our fans are going to be excited about it. Our critics are going to say, "Well, it's their first year. They had a lighter schedule." Yeah, everybody's going to look at. The reality is we had 4 wins against teams that we were the major underdog in that we pulled off winning. And I go back and look at. I look back at the Central Arkansas game and just, with 3 touchdown underdog, nobody gave us a chance in that. We sneak out of there with a win. And I go back to that game and I just think about when adversity hit, when things didn't look very well, just to see a team that stuck together, kept believing, and when we saw opportunity, those kids took it. And now the adversity flipped and went over on the other side to a team that's supposed to be beating us. And next thing you know, our confidence shot up. And I think our kids grew in that confidence, and we pulled off. And even in a couple of our losses, I look back and go, you know what? Tough thing is we probably beat ourselves more than they beat us. And that gave us actually some confidence in knowing that we're not too far away from being able to compete with, the CMOs of the world, UT Martins, people in the top echelon of our conference right now. When you look at, oh, shoot, we were in a game where – was it them or was it us? So that gives us a lot of confidence.
Now, especially it's only 2 years removed and kind of going back a little bit from the COVID year, keeping it all together. Like, obviously the transition didn't happen until 22, but it's not too. That's still within your recruiting class of the kids you had and whatnot. Do you look back to 2020 with the ups and downs of everything like that, of the lack of clarity to where this foundation started? Because you've been at the school for a minute, obviously, but you're progressing, and all of a sudden it's no football, everyone, and you're like, oh, we're going to play in the spring, well, we're going to play one game, and it just becomes so wonky that, like, to see where you guys were at in 2020, a lot of questions to 2022, where you guys are a competitive football team in a conference and division you guys have 2 years ago really had no idea you'd be a part of.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I've had so many coaches in our little, coaching's a small fraternity, and you hear how some of the COVID stuff helped, how it hurt. You'd hear of teams that say, man, that devastated our team. Yeah. I actually feel like our team even grew closer together through that time. I think, number one, our job as coaches, we were going to support every kid in the decision they wanted to make. We chose not to take a side. We chose not to do, because as we know, it's always the elephant in the room is kind of like, okay, what was the big issues? Well, we know what those issues were. And I think the fact that, letting every kid know on that team that, whatever side you're on and decisions you make, we're a team and we're going to love and support each other. Yeah. And I didn't realize at the time how that really affected kids and how they felt in an area where, and so in the locker room, you never heard of, somebody pointing fingers back and forth. I think a lot of coaches and a lot of leaders probably didn't realize, when they, and I think it was for the good of the cause. I get it. But I think, trying to make people do things they didn't want to do or things like that probably drove wedges more than anything. Yeah. I think one of the best things we did is that, not once did I ever hear anybody because of an agenda or political ideology or anything. And also with a lot of the civil unrest that was going on, is, that was another time where, we came together so much because, again, we led the charge on even like meeting with our the police officers in St. Charles and having our leadership. We started we started actually a diversity group and a panel basically and started building relationships with our law enforcement around St. Charles. Yeah. Next thing you know, man, that was a lot going on. Yeah. And I started realizing, again, through adversity, the blessing of adversity is how even closer our team became. And so, again, looking back now, you realize, man, these guys are special. They love each other. But we use that word a lot in this program. It's a very strong word. And I think those times of adversity is where you kind of saw that. You actually saw that lived out, and it paid dividends.
Well, I think it's infectious, because even if you have a kid like coming in now, he can relate to John Smith, who was a freshman there, a lot of, leaving home for the first time, coming, and because you and the coaching staff are taking care of these kids, and it's like Coach Stug may be hard at times, but like, man, when we were at our lowest as a team, society, whatever you want to call it. Like, he held us together, and he never, closed the door, and he never injected his beliefs. He listened, and, if I thought one thing, he would listen to me, and we'd talk about it. And then that just creates, that culture for years upon years, to where after these kids are all gone, those memories built in the early days of the program. It's like, now we're going to transition to this other conference, this other, division. This isn't anything compared to what 2020 or the early days of the program were. It puts everything in perspective, in my opinion, as well. So, yeah. I mean, obviously you're building Lindenwood right now. You've had a couple guys go into professional football leagues. We talked about it offline with Trey, Clint. You got a couple guys coming up. What's your message to these young players coming up and showing Lindenwood's putting people in these pro football leagues? Trey is a part of your resume now, and then you have a couple guys who are doing their pro workouts right now. Is that just fueling your fire to keep pushing on right now with the new group? Yeah, no doubt. I mean, I think, first of all, every kid, even in recruiting, they sit in my office and they want to, hey, when I'm done here, what's my chances of going into the league? A lot of them even make decisions, like they choose places because they think the end in mind is like, well, can I get to the NFL, or now with all these professional leagues, can I get to a professional league, or do I got to be at the biggest program out there? That does affect a lot of kids' decisions. I think the fact is reminding our kids here, number one, is to prioritize. It's the typical sales pitch of, at Lindenwood right now, you got a 98% chance of getting a job when you get a degree at Lindenwood. You got a less than 1% chance of making it to the NFL right now. And that's just what the percents are. We're right at 1%. Those aren't great odds. But, when you sit back and, especially guys, because we still have guys that know who John Harris is at the Broncos. We have guys that know Clint. They've seen they don't. Pierre's been gone for a little bit, but Pierre's around our program all the time, so they see Pierre a lot. But they all had a similar work ethic. They had a similar drive. They did all the little things that set them apart, and it's like, model what you've seen out of these guys. Don't talk about it. You don't need to let everybody know you want to go to the NFL. I think every kid grows up, wants to, in their sport, they want to go be a pro, right? You love the game. We're passionate about it. But, I just remember John Harris, every football meeting we had, that he was one of the only guys that was constantly taking notes to whatever coach was talking. He never talked a lot. He just went out and played, never missed things. Clint was the same way. I can go down the list. And those are the ones that rise up. Sometimes having to go here and go there and do all these things to try to control your destiny, a lot of times doesn't work out. But when you do the little things right, it's amazing how that builds a foundation. So following up on that, does that make it easier for you as a coach? It's like, oh, you want to go to the NFL? Are you doing this? Because I have a proven program, essentially. The cookbook is here. Are you following the steps, or are you trying to make your own recipe? Because if you make your own recipe, it's not going to taste as good. Yeah. Well, for everyone that's made it, the Clint's, that are there, John Harris, Trey, you start going down the list, Pierre. It's amazing all the other ones that had interest but that never had the opportunity to get there because of what you just said. Hey, thanks, Coach, for getting me here, but I'm going to take it from here. It's not that we just know everything. It's like, when you've seen
when you've had experience with what this beyond even goes back to guys from Sioux Falls that that we talk about, like Trey's. You go back to northern Colorado with the Reed Dowdys and the Vince Jacksons and guys like that we had that went on. Again, you have enough experience to say, hey, but the ones that kind of pay attention to the roadmap to get there, and a lot of it is like, stop talking about it and just go to work. The scouts are going to show up. They're going to end up at practice. They're going to sit in my office and ask the littlest of questions that you have. That's what I always tell our young guys. They're going to ask me, do you go to class? They're going to ask me, where do you sit? What row do you sit in the classroom? If I went to ask one of your professors, hey, tell me about so-and-so, what are they going to say? It's not, it's amazing that what they fine tooth comb through your history, because there's the NFL. It's in any of these pro organizations, it's a big investment, man. You can't, they're going to check, they're going to dot all the T's and dot the I's. Did I do that right?
Yeah.
Cross the T's and dot the I's.
Yeah. You ever hear about that story with Jamarcus Russell? And I've done this with a couple people where it's like, hey, watch this video. Tell me what the coverage is you think we can win against. And he's like, oh yeah, when they go to 46, like we will take care of that. And it's a blank tape. Like, I find stories like that really fascinating. Right. Now, as a coach, obviously at the FCF level, there is that, I don't want to say negative stigma, because I think over the last couple of years, there's been so many players to prove themselves at the NFL. But with the emergence of the XFL and USFL, is that kind of used as a recruiting tool of like, hey, there are options here? And, with these leagues putting out Pro Bowlers at this point, are you kind of changing your recruiting pitch a little bit from you can get to the NFL possibly to you can get the pro football?
Yeah. I think we're pretty old school with the recruiting thing. I think those questions, when those questions come up in our recruiting weekends, or in my office with a parent and a kid, kind of the final meeting before they leave, and you're talking about their offer and all this stuff. Yeah, a lot of times that'll come up where a kid might say, when I might ask them, what's your reservations about, or what are you, what are some positive, what are some negatives? It's amazing how many feel like, well, I've got this preferred walk-on opportunity at maybe a Power 5 opportunity, or and I'll say, okay, what? Well, first thing they think of is like, well, it's easier to get to the NFL from the Power 5, right? False, right? So, and and a lot of times I'm careful to say that to them, because you try to lay out a reason why, because you really have the best interest part. But sometimes you almost motivate a kid into doing it, like, well, I'll show you, kind of thing. So I'm very careful about using that in recruiting. But the 3 guys that came back to Lindenwood here this last semester, starting with us now, came from those situations, the preferred walk-ons at the Power 5s that are like, what, this isn't what they thought they told me it was. And now I'm back to playing, having fun, and but you try to guide and help. I don't know if we use it as I think walking through our building and you see the NFL jerseys and stuff, I think speaks for itself. They see the cards and the scouts, the business cards there. Yeah. And you're able to see, currently that we have these guys from our program in pro leagues that, I think they see it themselves.
Now, football aside, we're closing up here. When you see a kid, 4 years of the program, decent GPA, maybe, a special teams guy, reserve wide receiver, and to see him succeed off the field, maybe he works at Edward Jones, maybe starts his own organization that feeds hungry people. Do you still get that same amount of validation and euphoric, because in the end, college football and high school football, we're building young men. We're building functional members of society. Is that the same thing as if you'd have John Smith, you think, go to the first round, number 3 pick?
Those are and I'm glad you asked that, Pat, because I think, it's common, and it's not even a criticism. People are fascinated with the success story in sport. Yeah. Man, this guy went on from here. And it's cool that, because, I can sit here and start to go down the list of guys that the ones that are amazing when you see kids that have come into your program, probably that from society's percentages will show you're in a small percentile of doing what you're doing. Yeah. You start realizing, football, the discipline of football, the being a part of an organization that help get guys to understand work ethic and how now they have a belief in themselves to go on. And you see kids come to your program that come from situations where you know if it wasn't for football they would never be doing what they're doing. And I think yes, to celebrate the guys that are gone into real estate or insurance, or they've started their own business, or they're teaching and coaching. I think right now to sit here and at our mega camp or our coaches clinic to have 5 of your former players, walk into your clinic and we're all of us coaches are all hugging each other because they were just players for us a few years ago. Now they're affecting and changing the lives of kids in their football programs in their high schools. I don't discredit. It's like you almost celebrate that more than the guys that go on and play in the league, even though that's a major accomplishment too. But
there's so many negative stories, and I think the first one comes out is Vince Young.
Sure.
Made all this money and then I hate to say washed out because he played 7 years or something like that, but made all this money, retired maybe forcibly, and then he's broke, and then you've come out with these stories about he couldn't really his understanding of the English language was not to his educational level, and it's just, to me, it's football is temporary. It mirrors life. There's so much more to build these young men, because for some guys it's playing in the Canada USFL, XFL, NFL for a season or two. That's it. That's the pinnacle. Yeah. What are you doing lately? How are you? You've had all this opportunity. You went to school for free. What are you doing with all those that privilege that not many people obviously.
Well, to be honest with you, you're seeing it all right now with the NIL, all these things. We're not going to put Corvettes and Lamborghinis in the end zone to try to recruit guys to come to Lindenwood. We're going to prepare them in life and prepare them in a 3-dimensional way, in a transformational way. It's fine to have dreams and aspirations, but I think right now the fact that we're, there's always in a transactional type program, it's hey, I'm going to give you something. You're going to help me get what I need through that relationship. But if things don't go well, sorry, man, you're not helping us succeed anymore. Transformationally, it's kind of hey, we're going to get to the finish line together. And so I think we've created that a little bit in this, in this industry right now with hey man, come here and I can get you this, this, and this. But, is that truly life though? It's kind of I'd rather help build that foundation. People can have aspirations to go on, but it's how you treat people. It's the work ethic to get there. It's how do you handle adversity? If we can teach them things, why we've got them here, then they can go on and accomplish those things, but they'll know that we've helped prioritize their life, hopefully.
Well, I think that's a good way to end it. I think I'd love to have you come back because I think there's 9 episodes in just a 35-minute time that we have. But, Coach, thank you so much for coming in. Good luck this season. I'll definitely be at some games. I'd love to see the Hall of Lindenwood if you'd have me come up there.
We'd love to have you over, Pat. Thanks for having me in today. Appreciate you, buddy. Yeah.